Hello, and welcome back to this Tuesday edition of the Fantasy Football Actuary Podcast. I am once again your host, Brock Talby, the Fantasy Football Actuary. So, as it is a Tuesday episode, we will get into Congratulate or Commiserate first. This is the segment, if you're new, where I talk about how I did across my three leagues. I have a 10-team ESPN Standard, a 12-team Yahoo Superflex, and a Dynasty type league on Reality Sports Online. So I talk about how I did in those three leagues for myself, and then we get some feedback from listeners on how they did over this past week. So week 4 was another downer for me. So I started off good in weeks 1 and 2. I had a bad week last week where I lost all three leagues, and I lost all three again this week. But it was the first week that I had no injuries occur during the game. So at least there's a silver lining. I finally feel like a winner there. I didn't hit the injury lottery. Um, so yeah, silver linings, but I still did end up losing all three. They weren't terrible showings. I think I was the third highest score in my Dynasty League, and I ended up losing by a few points. In that league, I could have won had I played DJ Chark instead of Hunter Renfrow. And we'll get into that comparison on why I did that. But suffice it to say that maybe being so in the weeds with these statistics and projections and looking at everything so close as a fantasy football analyst, that could end up hurting you sometimes, like this past weekend where I played Renfro over DJ Chark. So I was still third highest score in that league. I still like my outlook going forward. I actually just made a trade in that league also. I traded a future first rounder for James Robinson. So I'm really trying to get my team ready for the playoffs, for a good playoff push, because I think I'm built for a championship. And in a dynasty style league, if you have a good year, you want to push for the championship as much as you can. So I thought that was worth it to get James Robinson. In my ESPN 10 team standard, I played the top scorer from the first 3 weeks, and it was a pretty close game. He didn't put up crazy monster numbers this week. He has Alvin Kamara, which is a big reason why he dominates. So Alvin Kamara had a more muted week. So he left the window open for me. Unfortunately, with the Steelers and Titans getting delayed, I was forced into playing Deebo Samuel as my wide receiver 2 alongside Justin Jefferson because Deontay Johnson was out. And then Julian Edelman I have, but I wasn't going to play him without Cam, and he did not look good on Monday night anyways. So Deebo was the right call out of those options, since A.J. Brown and Deontay Johnson were both gone. Had to go with Deebo as my wide receiver 2. He was limited, so I didn't get enough from him. And then Josh Jacobs and David Johnson both didn't do enough to get me over the hump to win. Josh Allen, he did leave with a wrist injury, and I was basically done. That would have been my 4th week in a row where someone got hurt in game. Luckily, he came back in, and my best player is still there. So, silver lining, I'm 2-2 in both the Dynasty and the ESPN League. So, not the worst case scenario, not the best case scenario either. It's been a rocky road a couple of these weeks with injuries and COVID delays. In my Yahoo Superflex League, I'm also 500 because of the way that we do. You get a point for winning your matchup, and you get a point for being in the top half of the league in scoring for that week. So I'm 1-3 matchup wise, but I'm 1-3 matchup wise, but then I have one more week where I scored in the top half. So it gets me up to 500. So I end up being 4-4. Yeah, that league again with AJ Brown out and Derrick Henry out and the other COVID issues and injuries. We don't have an IR in that league, which I've always found weird, but there's no IR. So anybody that's out and injured, I have to leave on my bench. So I don't really have room for drop ads that much. So my lineup was not ideal. I ended up playing Brandon Cooks. I thought he was going to have a good matchup. He had 0 points. And then I ended up playing against the guy that had Odell Beckham. So Odell Beckham went off against me, 2 trick play touchdowns. And I might catch flack for my hate on Odell Beckham. and then he comes out and drops like 35 points. But 2 trick play touchdowns. The one good thing was that they had a 2-yard slant play at the end zone for him. They drew that play up for him. So that's a promising sign. The other 2 touchdowns I would not count on. Jarvis Landry throwing him a touchdown and then a reverse like sweep pitch thing. So I wouldn't count on those 2. I'm still not a fan of Odell Beckham, but he got me back in that league for sure. So 0-3 this week. Hopefully I can pick it up next week. I like my matchups. I like Deontay Johnson coming back. Hopefully A.J. Brown's healthy. And Deebo Samuel's getting back to health. I have him in all 3 leagues. And Antonio Gibson's breaking out. So hopefully I can utilize him better. I did not play him this week based on the matchup. I thought his upside was capped in my opinion. I thought he'll get like 40 yards and maybe a touchdown for 10-ish points. I did not anticipate him being used in the passing game. He had not been used in the passing game the first 3 weeks. So we might talk about him a little bit later. So we will get into a listener. William wrote in and messaged me. He said, I play in 2 leagues, picked CMC and Chubb as my first rounders respectively, and both are on IR. Combine that with Galladay, Devontae Adams, and AJ Brown, and it spells a combined record of 1-7. Fantasy sucks. Those are a lot of injuries. It's unfortunate to lose both of your first rounders to injury across both leagues. 1-7. It can feel like fantasy does suck sometimes. I would say don't give up. All you need to do is slip into the playoffs. I know for my main league, it's really close because of the way that the injuries have fallen. They're kind of spread out. Everyone's being hit by injuries, and lots of people are being affected by COVID so far, which may continue. So there are 5 teams in my main league that are 2-2. So it seems like everyone's having ups and downs. So hopefully your downs have all just come at the start of the season and you can get past them quicker than other people. And hopefully it'll turn around. But yeah, I understand. Injuries have been so prevalent. And so when that happens, that sucks. But that's fantasy football and we got to roll with it. So hopefully we can help you get into some good waiver wire pickups to aid your team going forward. We'll get into our next Tuesday segment, high flying or nose diving. So I'm just going to talk about a high flying or nose diving player at each position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, and what I think their outlook for the coming weeks are. So we'll get into our high flying QB is Teddy Bridgewater. I mentioned him in my streaming QB consideration last week, but I did not expect the insane week that he put up. He was QB3 on the week, and the Panthers seem to get better every week. So he had 32 rushing yards and a touchdown. If he has a safe rushing base like that, even 30 yards, that's 3 points. So if he has a safe rushing base like that, I think he can become more than just a streaming option. I will caution that he was a streaming option last week because of the good matchup against Arizona. But then at the same time, he gets to play Atlanta this week. So I would start him again this week, no questions asked. And we'll see how he does going forward. He has the potential to become more than a streamer. Right now, I'm playing him based on the matchup only, but he's on the upswing for sure. My nose-diving quarterback is Drew Brees. So when you drafted him, it was most likely to be your every week starter. The loss of Michael Thomas and the insane play of Alvin Kamara have really capped any kind of ceiling for Drew Brees. He's not throwing the ball downfield. He's dumping it off to Kamara. He even had a couple touchdowns this week and still only finished like 15 or 16 points based on your format. So, and they won too. They dominated the Lions for most of the game. So I don't see any upside with Drew Brees right now. He was QB 17 coming into the week, and he's sitting at QB 19 on the year. If you haven't looked elsewhere by now, I think it's about time to. Basically, any solid streaming option would be better than Drew Brees. You can find better options available on your waiver wire, like Teddy Bridgewater, that will give you a more safe base and way more upside than Drew Brees. So, yes, I am out on Drew Brees right now. Maybe when Michael Thomas comes back, it will be better, but it's not looking good right now, even though they're winning. Alvin Kamara is really the reason they're winning. It's not Drew Brees. So my high-flying running back, I have 2 this week. I'm going with Joe Mixon and Antonio Gibson. Joe Mixon owners were angry, bitter. and losing patience before this week. They wasted a late first or second early round for this. The first 3 weeks were terrible for Joe Mixon. He was sitting at running back 35, and none of the performances looked good or showed the type of fire that we saw from Joe Mixon all last season. So a good thing about Mixon coming into the season was even when they were terrible last year, when the Bengals were just getting crushed, Mixon was always trying hard, running hard, making plays. But through the first 3 weeks of this season, you hadn't really seen that. That changed this week, and he kind of ran all over the Jaguars on his way to the overall top running back finish on the week, and he's now running back 7 on the season. So 1 week turnaround, and you're feeling really good about Joe Mixon. But can it continue? It won't be this good going forward, I would imagine, because the matchup just won't be this juicy. He has Baltimore and Indy coming up, which I know Antonio Gibson did pretty well against Baltimore, but you're not going to put up the insane yardage and 3 TDs like he did this past week. Indy looks like one of the best defenses in the league. But hopefully this week was enough to kind of jumpstart him into playing with a little more passion than what was visible on the field in the first 3 weeks. That's what I want to see. I want to see him trying hard, running hard, with a purpose again, like he did last season, even when the Bengals were terrible. So if he can continue that, I think he can return low-end RB1, high-end RB2 numbers, no matter what the matchup is. So I would start him as such. And then Antonio Gibson. He was just a stud. He's become an every week starter as an RB2, in my opinion. I have him in all 3 of my leagues. I've been waiting on him. I think I started him the first week in my Dynasty League out of desperation because I have David Montgomery and he was coming back from injury. I wasn't sure how his groin was going to hold up coming off that injury so quickly. So I started him. It's the only time I've started him through the first 4 weeks. But I think he is an every week starter now. I can tell you he's going in my lineup over David Johnson in my 10-team ESPN league. He's going in my lineup over David Johnson again in my 12-team Superflex league. And in my Dynasty league, he's going in my lineup over Kenyon Drake. So Gibson has scored 3 straight weeks, and he finally got involved in the passing game, which I alluded to earlier. He had 4 receptions on 5 targets for 82 yards. He's the most explosive guy on the offense that needs explosive plays to compete, and that type of passing game utilization gives him a safe floor even when the TDs don't happen. So take away the touchdown this past week, and he still has 13 points. That's fantastic. And if he gets that touchdown with that floor, he gets the 18, 19, 20 points you saw this week. So I don't expect him to score a touchdown every week, but as long as he keeps being involved in the passing game, which once Washington sees what he can do, I don't know why they would not continue to involve him. If he continues to stay involved in the passing game, he is an RB2 every week starter for me, and he's going to be in all 3 of my lineups this coming week. My nose-diving running back is Kenyon Drake. He was my nose-diving running back last week, but dang it, he has to be again. Like, this was the matchup. And I'm a Drake owner in my Dynasty League, and this was the matchup. This was the week. He had to make believers out of us. And he can tweet all he wants at fantasy owners getting disappointed and trading him or benching him, but he's not producing. This really, it's just not what you want to see. I actually traded, like I said, I traded a future first round pick in my Dynasty League to acquire James Robinson so that I have a better core, because I think my team is really good. I have Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs, DJ Chark as my wide receivers, Dak at quarterback. I have a really solid team in this Dynasty League, and I want to push for a championship. And if I have to play Kenyon Drake, he's not going to get it done. I do have Antonio Gibson to sub in, and now I acquired James Robinson just for more running back depth, and I will put Montgomery and Drake on the bench as backups right now. That's just how I see it. Kenyon Drake is not a reliable fantasy starter. He failed to get it done against the Panthers, who have been the worst run defense both last year and this year. And then it's time to panic. I said last week, if he didn't get it done against Carolina, it would be time to panic. It's time to panic. Edmonds looks better. Chase Edmonds, their backup, he looks better. And I could see his role expanding even if Kenyon Drake's injury that he left the game with late isn't a lingering issue. So he did get banged up a little bit near the end of the game, but that's not why he sucked. He played the whole game and he sucked. And then he got hurt near the end. Chase Edmonds got the touchdown in garbage time instead of Kenyon Drake. But Edmonds looks good. Even if Drake's back, I think Edmonds has a real shot at being having a more expanded role. So my high flying wide receiver is DJ Chark. Okay, I mentioned it earlier. I lost my dynasty matchup this week because I sat DJ Chark for Hunter Renfrow. I was far from the only fantasy analyst or podcaster to recommend Renfrow last week. So let's break it down. Chark had 3 targets in week 1, 4 targets in week 2, and then missed with an injury. Renfrow had 8 targets in week 1 and week 2 and week 3, and was coming off an 84-yard and 1 touchdown game. And then Bryan Edwards and Henry Ruggs, the other 2 top wide receivers for Las Vegas, goes down. So Renfrow seemed like a safer option from the volume standpoint in a PPR scoring format, and he wasn't fresh off the injury. So even if Chark replicated his first 2 weeks, he'd only have about 10 points. The week he scored a touchdown, he had 40 yards on 3 targets and 3 catches for 10 points. So even if Chark replicated that coming off the injury, Renfrow should be able to hit that from a volume alone this week with all the targets he's coming in, all the targets perceived to be going to Bryan Edwards or Henry Ruggs that are now going to Renfrow and Darren Waller. So I was expecting high targets, high volume, and a chance at a touchdown like he had the week before. But that's not the way it worked out. Chark came out with 9 targets this week, which turned into 8 catches for 95 yards and 2 touchdowns, and didn't show any signs of injury. So he finished as the wide receiver 3 on the week. If his target share continues in the vein of week 4 rather than the first 2 weeks, I think he's completely back to stud status from last year. So it feels bad when you're an analyst and you're looking at the data, you're looking at target share, it looks like it's there. So Renfrow looked like a safer option based on volume, based on the format, based on his other 2 wide receivers being gone. But that wasn't the play, and I suffered for it. So Chark is my high-flying wide receiver. My nose-diving wide receiver is DJ Moore. Moore was drafted fairly high, and the optics are panning out in Carolina for Robbie Anderson. Anderson's completely stolen DJ Moore's thunder, and he's the clear number 1 in Carolina. I honestly don't know what to do with Moore because you can't trade him for anything right now. He's not worth anything based on his performances, but you can't drop him because the talent is there. That's why he was drafted high. But I don't know. I guess you're stuck holding him and praying that he can get more involved. But I'm going to do that holding and praying while he's comfortably on my bench from now on. I'm not... Okay, it's tough because he has a really good matchup. He plays Atlanta this week. So I think you maybe give him one more shot in your lineup. If he doesn't get it done against the sieve of a defense, which is Atlanta, then you can be done with DJ Moore. You can put him on your bench. You can try to move him for whatever you can get. But if he doesn't get it done this week, I'm out on DJ Moore. He's had his chances. Robbie Anderson's the clear number 1. DJ Moore is breaking hearts across the nation for anybody who drafted him in the 3rd round. My high-flying tight end is Robert Tonyan. So I believe he broke the all-time fantasy scoring record for a Green Bay tight end. If that doesn't get you into the high-flying section, I don't know what will. He's only 13% rostered in ESPN leagues, which makes the week even crazier because the only people who really got to enjoy it are people who threw him in as a desperate flex option when Davante Adams was ruled out. But he won some people weeks that way for sure. So it might have worked out better. If you had Davante Adams in your flex waiting for Monday Night Football, it might have worked out better to put him in your IR, pick up Robert Tonyan, and then dance your way to victory with his 33 points. So he's now tight end 1 on the season because of his 5 TDs. So if he keeps getting used in the red zone, sign me up for Robert Tonyan. I am on board for Robert Tonyan. My nose diving tight end is Tyler Higbee. In the first 4 weeks, he has 3 touchdowns, which is fantastic, right? 3 touchdowns in 4 weeks. That's what you want to see from your tight end. Except they all came in 1 game. Outside of week 2, he has 0 touchdowns. He hasn't topped 40 yards, and he hasn't topped 3 catches. So Tyler Higbee's really offering you nothing right now. He looks like a desperation streamer during buys or COVID scares, maybe, but he's not a weekly starter right now. He had that one good week. Other than that, he's not being used, and I would not start him. There's a lot better options. We will move into straight fire from the waiver wire. This is our next Tuesday segment where I talk about my favorite targets on the waiver wire, how much fab I would kind of spend on some of them, and why I'm picking them up or why I'm not really that high on them, but they might be an option for you. So my top target at running back is Damian Harris. Sony Michel got placed on IR yesterday, and Harris is coming off of IR. So he immediately ran well to the tune of 17 carries for 100 yards. Going into the game, the Chiefs had given up a 5.3 yards per carry number, so maybe it was partially a product of the matchup, but Harris was the guy everyone loved at camp before he got injured and placed on IR. During preseason, or the time where we would have had a preseason, during the camp, all the beat reporters were talking about Damian Harris. They said that he looked fantastic. He was running with the ones. He was a stud. He was going to tear it up this year. And then he got placed on IR, and you haven't really heard anything of him since. But with him coming back, with Sony Michel going on to IR, I think Sony's time in New England is done. And I think Harris is the guy. I know it's tough to trust a New England running back, but Harris is clearly the best runner out of the current trio of Harris, White, and Burkhead. Burkhead and White are more passing game options. Harris looks like the best runner. If you need a starting running back, I would spend about 25% of my fab on Damian Harris. Maybe you lost a running back to injury this week, or you already lacked a good starting option or a good running back core. I would spend about 25% of my fab if I needed a running back. He's not an injury fill-in, which is why he's my top option. He's going to be a starter going forward indefinitely through the season. That's why he is my top running back option over these next two guys, Joshua Kelly and Justin Jackson. So Austin Eckler is out for 4 to 6 weeks with a hamstring injury, and the Chargers' backfield will be led by rookie Joshua Kelly and veteran Justin Jackson. These guys would probably have been my top target before the IR moves and Damian Harris's play last night in Monday Night Football. But Damian Harris is not filling in for an injured starter. He is the starter going forward. Joshua Kelly and Justin Jackson are just filling in until Eckler, the Chargers stud, comes back. So both Kelly and Jackson have good appeal. Kelly's about 70% owned already in ESPN leagues, but Jackson is a lot more widely available and may be the better value pick anyways. If Joshua Kelly is still available in your league, you're probably going to have to drop a lot of fab on him, whereas Justin Jackson's probably going to fly under the radar for, a few bucks of fab. So I think he might be the better value. I could see spending 10 to 15% of my fab on either if I was super desperate. I don't think you'll need to spend that much on Justin Jackson, honestly, to get him. But just remember, they only have really high value for 4 to 6 weeks until Eckler comes back. Joshua Kelly hasn't really done that much in the last couple of weeks with Eckler there. He was a big pickup after week 1 and 2, and then going into the Carolina matchup, but he hasn't been that productive since. So 4 to 6 weeks, they have some upside. 10 to 15% of my fab if I needed them or I was desperate. My next running back is Dearness Johnson. The other big news from the week was that Nick Chubb's MCL injury, where he's now expected to miss 6 weeks. So the two big injuries this week were Austin Eckler and Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb has an MCL injury. It came out that he's going to miss at least 6 weeks. That does overlap with the Browns' bye, so you're already going to miss him one of those weeks anyways. But Kareem Hunt's obviously a top 10 back now. And then Dearness Johnson actually came in and looked good. He even led the backfield in carries after Chubb left and went for over 90 yards. That might have been a product of Hunt was questionable coming into the game, so he might have had a more managed workload. And they were up big for a while until the Cowboys did the Cowboys thing where they come back in the fourth quarter in garbage time and make the game look really close. But I expect Kareem Hunt to be the workhorse. I think Dearness Johnson will get work just because the Browns want to have a rotation. So there is some value there, but Hunt's going to be the main workhorse. I think he's a top 10 guy easy now without Chubb. He's going to get the touchdowns. and I expect him to get the lion's share of carries going forward. I don't think it'll be split as evenly as it was this past week, just because Kareem Hunt came in a little banged up. They might have been managing him. They didn't want to overwork him just because Chubb was out. My last running back to consider is Chase Edmonds. He might be owned in your league. He's owned in all of my leagues, but Kenyon Drake has looked bad and is now banged up. Edmonds could be in line for more touches and even a starting job at some point this season, so something to consider. Like I said, he's owned in all of my leagues, but if he's there for you, he's definitely worth 5 to 10% of your fab based on Kenyon Drake's play and the fact that he might be injured. My top wide receiver to grab is Tim Patrick. He led Denver in targets with 7, while Jerry Jeudy only had 3. He's a big guy, so he can be a good target closer to the end zone for whatever QB Denver's rolling out there in the coming weeks. I don't see anything special with him. Watching that Thursday night football game, he didn't wow me. But with Sutton on IR, Fant dealing with the ankle injury, and KJ Hamler banged up with that hamstring injury, there's nobody else to fill that spot other than Patrick. So it's basically Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick, and then dump offs to Melvin Gordon. So I would only spend about 5 to 8% of my fab maybe if I really needed a wide receiver play. But hopefully you don't have to spend that much. I don't like spending that much on wide receivers generally anyways. I did spend big on Justin Jefferson because of my Titans Pittsburgh game getting postponed situation, and obviously I was forced into starting Deebo Samuel. So in that league where I got Jefferson, my 10-team ESPN league, I had to spend big on Jefferson because I needed a wide receiver play last week. But I don't think anyone needs Tim Patrick this week. So 5 to 8% is the most I would spend on fab. Other wide receivers are Scotty Miller and T. Higgins. I mentioned them as considerations last week and maybe the week before for T. Higgins. Miller came through with a good game, but Tom Brady's not going to throw 5 touchdowns every week. So Scotty Miller's definitely not the first read there, but he's a solid pickup as long as Godwin's out. T. Higgins, on the other hand, is clearly the number 2 behind Tyler Boyd in Cincinnati. He had more targets and was far more productive than A.J. Green and gets used in the red zone a solid amount. So I think T. Higgins is a good pickup. I think A.J. Green has been passed. I don't think it's even in question anymore. I think T. Higgins is ahead of A.J. Green. So he's the number 2 in Cincinnati in my mind. I would roster him, maybe start him in the right matchup. I don't know that he's any kind of locked-in flex play on a weekly basis yet, but he should be rostered. My top tight end, surprise, surprise, is Robert Tonyan. So a 3-touchdown game can be a mirage for some players like Tyler Higbee, but Tonyan has 2 other games in the first 4 weeks where he's caught a touchdown as well. So with bye weeks starting this week and injuries everywhere, you could do a lot worse than Robert Tonyan. I would spend no more than 10% of my fab on him because he still is a tight end in Green Bay. And the 3-touchdown game last night came with Devontae Adams and Allen Lazard both out. So I don't think the touchdown pace can continue like this. Once Adams comes back, Adams will be the main target. He will be the main red zone target for Rodgers. And depending on when Lazard comes back, that'll just take more targets away from Tonyan. But I think he's a good option. I think he has touchdown upside every week. There's no way he's going to replicate anything like the Monday Night Football game at any other point this season. But with bye weeks, if you have COVID issues, Robert Tonyan is a solid flyer at tight end. Other tight ends, I mentioned Mo Alley-Cox last week, and I will do so again because he looks like the clear tight end 1 now in Indy. He's had 3 good weeks in a row where he either had a touchdown or went over 100 yards. So I think Mo Alley-Cox is worth rostering and worth playing in tight end, again, if you have a bye week to deal with or other injuries to the position. Eric Ebron was on bye last week, but he's a solid option that's widely available as well. He had a touchdown in week 3 before the Pittsburgh game got pushed. So he's probably still on your waiver wire, especially with Pittsburgh being on a bye last week. So Eric Ebron's there to consider as well. Finally, we will wrap up with my quarterback streamers with the best matchup. So I don't go through traditional waiver wire pickups at quarterback, but I will give you some streamers based on the matchup. Gardner Minshew is against Houston this week. I think that's a great matchup. He's got DJ Chark back. He looked like the Gardner that we all love last week. So I would stream Gardner Minshew. Jimmy Garoppolo might be back this week from injury, and he could be on your waivers because of the injury. He might have been dropped, and he gets to play Miami. I mentioned earlier, Teddy Bridgewater is facing Atlanta. He looked really good against Arizona. I expect more of the same against Atlanta this week at least. So Teddy Bridgewater, fire him up. And then Kirk Cousins gets Seattle. I know I had Kirk Cousins as a streamer last week. He only threw one touchdown, which kind of capped his upside, but Seattle is just bleeding points similar to Atlanta. I think they're the two worst pass defenses. I think they're giving up the most yards. That's why Teddy Bridgewater and Kirk Cousins, both streamers again this week. You can check the website for the Week 5 rankings on Thursday. If you want to catch the video version of any of these podcasts, you can check out my YouTube channel, which is The Fantasy Football Actuary. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at The FF Actuary. I try to stay active on Twitter, staying up to date with the news, with some of my takes on just the NFL and COVID and life in general. I have a Facebook page as well, The Fantasy Football Actuary. So that will wrap up this Tuesday episode. Good luck. Have fun watching Thursday Night Football. Hopefully it's a better game than last week. And I will see you on Saturday. Until then, keep crunching those numbers.